The value of an object acquires such visibility and tangibility as it possesses through the fact that one object is offered for another. This reciprocal balancing, through which each economic object expresses its value in another object, removes both objects from the sphere of merely subjective significance. The relativity of valuation signifies its objectification. The basic relationship to man, in whose emotional life all the processes of valuation admittedly take place, is here presupposed. It has been absorbed, so to speak, by the objects, and thus equipped they enter the arena of mutual balancing, which is not the result of their economic value but its representative or content. In exchange, objects express their value reciprocally. The fact of economic exchange, therefore, frees the objects from their bondage to the mere subjectivity of the subjects and allows them to determine themselves reciprocally by investing the economic function in them. The object acquires its practical value not only by being in demand itself but through the demand for another object. Value is determined not by the relation to the demanding subject, but by the fact that this relation depends on the cost of a sacrifice which, for the other party, appears as a value to be enjoyed while the object itself appears as a sacrifice. Thus objects balance each other and value appears in a very specific way as an objective, inherent quality. While bargaining over the object is going on, in other words, while the sacrifice that it represents is being determined, its significance for both parties seems to be something external to them, as if each individual experienced the object only in relation to himself. Later on we shall see that an isolated economy also imposes the same necessity of sacrifice for the acquisition of the object, since it confronts economic man with the demands of nature, so that in this case, too, the same relationship endows the object with the same objectively conditioned significance even though there is only one participant in the exchange. The desire and sentiment of the subject is the driving force in the background, but it could not by itself bring about the value form, which is the result of balancing objects against each other. The economy transmits all valuations through the form of exchange, creating an intermediate realm between the desires that are the source of all human activity and the satisfaction of needs in which they culminate. The specific characteristic of the economy as a particular form of behavior and communication consists not only in exchanging values but in the exchange of values. Of course, the significance that objects attain in exchange is not wholly independent of their directly subjective significance which originally determines the relationship. The two are inseparably related, as are form and content. But the objective process, which very often also dominates the individual's consciousness, disregards the fact that values are its material. Its specific character is to deal with the equality of values. In much the same way, geometry has as its aim the determination of the relationship between the size of objects without referring to the substances for which these relationships are valid. As soon as one realizes the extent to which human action in every sphere of mental activity operates with abstractions, it is not as strange as it may seem at first glance that not only the study of the economy but the economy itself is constituted by a real abstraction from the comprehensive reality of valuations. The forces, relations and qualities of things, including our own nature, objectively form a unified whole which has to be broken down by our interests into a multitude of independent series or motives to enable us to deal with it. Every science investigates phenomena that are homogeneous and clearly distinguished from the problems of other sciences, whereas reality ignores boundaries and every section of the world presents an aggregate of tasks for all the sciences. Our practice excludes unilateral series from the outer and inner complexity of things and so constructs the great systems of cultural interests. The same is true for our sentiments. When we experience religious or social sentiments, when we are melancholy or joyful, it is always abstractions from total reality that are the objects of our feeling, whether because we react only to those impressions that can be brought within the scope of some common cultural interest, or because we endow every object with a certain coloring which derives its validity from its interweaving with other colorings to form an objective unity. Thus, the following formula is one way in which the relationship of man to the world may be expressed. Our practice as well as our theory continually abstracts single elements from the absolute unity and intermingling of objects, in which each object supports the other and all have equal rights, and forms these elements into relative entities and wholes. We have no relationship to the totality of existence, except in very general sentiments, we attain a definite relation to the world only by continually abstracting from phenomena, in accordance with our needs of thought and action, and investing these abstractions with the relative independence of a purely inner connection which the unbroken stream of world processes denies to objective reality. The economic system is indeed based on an abstraction, on the mutuality of exchange, the balance between sacrifice and gain, and in the real process of its development it is inseparably merged with its basis and results, desire and need. But this form of existence does not differentiate it from the other spheres into which we divide the totality of phenomena for the sake of our interests. The value of an object becomes objectified by exchanging it for another object. The decisive fact in the objectivity of economic value, which makes economics a special area of investigation, is that its validity transcends the individual subject. The fact that the object has to be exchanged against another object illustrates that it is not only valuable for me, but also valuable independently of me, that is to say, for another person. The equation, objectivity equals validity for subjects in general, finds its clearest justification in economic value. The equivalence of which we become aware, and in which we develop an interest through exchange, imparts to value its specific objectivity. For even though each of the elements in exchange may be personal or only subjectively valuable, the fact that they are equal to each other is an objective factor which is not contained within any one of these elements and yet does not lie outside of them either. Exchange presupposes an objective measurement of subjective valuations, not in the sense of being chronologically prior, but in the sense that both phenomena arise from the same act. Exchange as a form of life. It should be recognized that most relationships between people can be interpreted as forms of exchange. Exchange is the purest and most developed kind of interaction, which shapes human life when it seeks to acquire substance and content. It is often overlooked how much what appears at first a one-sided activity is actually based upon reciprocity. The orator appears as the leader and inspirer to the assembly, the teacher to his class, the journalist to his public, but, in fact, everyone in such a situation feels the decisive and determining reaction of the apparently passive mass. In the case of political parties, the saying is current that, "I am the leader, therefore I must follow them," and an outstanding hypnotist has recently emphasized that in hypnotic suggestion, obviously the clearest case of activity on one side and absolute dependence on the other, there is an influence, that is difficult to describe, of the person hypnotized upon the hypnotist, without which the experiment could not be carried out. Every interaction has to be regarded as an exchange, every conversation, every affection, even if it is rejected, every game, every glance at another person. The difference that seems to exist, that in interaction a person offers what he does not possess, whereas in exchange he offers only what he does possess, cannot be sustained. For in the first place, it is always personal energy, the surrender of personal substance, that is involved in interaction, and conversely, exchange is not conducted for the sake of the object that the other person possesses, but to gratify one's personal feelings which he does not possess. It is the object of exchange to increase the sum of value. Each party offers to the other more than he possessed before. It is true that interaction is the more comprehensive concept and exchange the narrower one. However, in human relationships the former appears predominantly in forms that may be interpreted as exchange. Every day of our lives comprises a process of gain and loss, of accretion and diminution of life's content, which is intellectualized in exchange, since the substitution of one object for another becomes conscious there.